I had spent years living abroad, far away from the house my grandparents left me. I hadn't set foot in it since I was a child, and even then, it was only in brief visits. Now I stood in front of it again, a place that was supposed to hold nothing but warm memories of my childhood, but all I could feel was a wave of unease. The house hadn't been cared for in years. The once white paint on the exterior was peeling, and the large oak trees in the yard looked gnarled and twisted, their leaves long dead or fallen. It was a place that time had forgotten, and now it felt like I was walking into a ghost of my past. The air was thick, and there was an odd silence, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to come inside. I stepped through the front door, and was immediately hit with the scent of dust and mildew. The familiar creaks of the wooden floors were all that greeted me as I walked into the hallway. My mind flooded with memories of my younger days, playing in the backyard, my grandmother's laughter, the smell of my grandfather's cigars, and the warmth of the kitchen where we used to sit for hours. It was hard to believe this was the same house. It felt different now. Empty, cold. I walked through the house slowly, the memories tugging at me with every step. The living room where we used to gather felt hollow, as if the walls themselves had swallowed all the life that had once filled it. The kitchen, where my grandmother had made her famous apple pie, was now just an abandoned shell of its former self, the counters covered in a thin layer of dust. Then, as I moved toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms, something stopped me. A faint, almost imperceptible feeling, something familiar. It tugged at the back of my mind, but I couldn't place it. I stood there for a moment, just staring at the closed door to my old bedroom. And then it hit me. I had an imaginary friend when I was a child. I hadn't thought about it in years, but there it was, clear as day. This strange, comforting figure I used to speak to, play with, and confide in. I'd forgotten all about it until just now. I laughed to myself. How silly it seemed now. Imaginary friends were just a childish phase, something kids grew out of. I was a grown man, after all. But for some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Something unsettling about that memory, like there was something I had forgotten. I pushed the thought away, telling myself it was just the nostalgia of being back in the house. But as I turned to leave the hallway and make my way to the living room, I could have sworn I heard a faint whisper just on the edge of my hearing. A voice, so soft I couldn't make out the words. I froze, my heart racing. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it. It was nothing, just the house settling. Or maybe it was the wind. But something told me I wasn't alone. And for the first time since stepping through that door, I felt the weight of something darker in the air. Something I hadn't sensed as a child. That night, as I lay in the same bedroom where I'd spent so many years of my childhood, the uneasy feeling I had earlier didn't go away. In fact, it only grew stronger. The house was silent, but it felt as if the silence was pressing in on me. The kind of silence that's too thick, too heavy to ignore. I tried to sleep, but my mind kept drifting back to that memory of my imaginary friend. The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I became. I'd been so young, barely 6 or 7, and yet I remembered how real the friend had seemed. I could almost hear its voice in my head again, feel its presence next to me as I played in the yard or sat at the kitchen table with my grandmother. I hadn't thought about it in years, not since I'd outgrown such childish things. But now, with every creak of the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a childish fantasy. There was something about it, something I couldn't quite place. Something about that friend. I turned over in bed, hoping to push the thoughts out of my mind. But as I stared at the ceiling, I heard it again, the soft whisper just out of reach, like a voice caught in the wind. I sat up quickly, my heart pounding. The room was dark, the shadows stretching across the walls. But there, in the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something move. My breath caught in my throat. I strained my eyes, trying to make out what it was, but the shadows remained still. My mind raced, and I couldn't help but wonder if I was just imagining things. After all, I'd just returned to a place full of memories. It could be nostalgia playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again. The whisper, this time clearer. It wasn't just the wind or my mind. It was words. Quiet, almost pleading. My skin went cold. I jumped out of bed and quickly turned on the light. The room was empty, nothing out of place. I laughed nervously, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Something wasn't right here, and I could feel it in my bones. I left the bedroom and made my way down the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. The house was dark, but not completely silent anymore. I could hear faint noises, like something scratching the walls or shifting just out of sight. As I passed the living room, I felt the air change. It was heavier here, colder, and the shadows seemed to move just beyond my reach. I stopped in front of the old family portrait that hung on the wall. My grandparents, my parents, and me, smiling together in a time that felt so far away. I stared at the picture, trying to shake off the discomfort, but it was hard to ignore the unsettling thought creeping into my mind. What if that imaginary friend wasn't imaginary at all? Suddenly I heard it again, this time louder. A voice, clearer, yet still distant. "Come back," it said. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't a child's voice. It was something else. Something older, more demanding. I didn't want to move, but my feet seemed to carry me forward. I walked down the hallway to the room at the very end, my childhood playroom. The door creaked open by itself as I approached, and I stepped inside. The room was just as I remembered it, though it was covered in dust now. The toys I used to play with forgotten in the corners. But there, in the center of the room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A small figure, sitting cross-legged on the floor. Its back was to me, but I could feel its presence. And then, without turning around, it spoke, its voice low and angry. "You left me." My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a dream. It wasn't my imagination. This was real. And whatever it was waiting for me to face the truth. I had no idea what I had brought back with me. But I knew one thing. This friend wasn't here to welcome me home. It was here to make me pay. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the figure in the corner of the room. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure didn't move, didn't even acknowledge me, but I could feel its presence, an oppressive weight, like 1,000 eyes pressing into my skin. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaky. The figure didn't respond, but I could feel its gaze now. It was as if it was pulling me into its own darkness, silently demanding I remember something. Something I had buried deep in my past. The whispers began again, this time louder, clearer. "Why did you leave me?" it said, its voice trembling with anger. You promised you'd never forget." I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. I couldn't move, couldn't even look away. I was trapped in this room with this thing that I had forgotten, this thing that had never forgotten me. The memories started to flood back in bursts, sharp and vivid. My childhood, my imaginary friend, the games we used to play. But as the memories came, so did the realization. I had not imagined it. It wasn't just a figment of my childhood imagination. It was real. I had a companion, a presence that kept me company when I was lonely, someone who was always there. But I never remembered what I'd promised. I never remembered the price I'd agreed to pay. "Leave me alone," I shouted, but the words sounded weak even to me. The figure didn't flinch. It just stayed there, in the shadows, its head slightly tilted as though it were studying me. And then slowly it began to turn around. I couldn't breathe as I looked at its face. Its features were blurred, shifting, like trying to look at something through the surface of water. But I could feel the eyes on me, cold, empty eyes that pierced through me, deep into something I didn't want to remember. Its face was not human, not anymore. The eyes were the worst part. Too much emptiness, too much hunger. "You think you can just forget me?" it whispered, its voice now a low growl. "You left me to rot in this house, alone. And now, I will make you remember." It stood up, and I finally found my legs again, stumbling backward toward the door, my breath ragged and shallow. But the door slammed shut with a violent bang before I could reach it, trapping me inside. I spun around, looking for an escape, but there was nothing, only the darkened corners of the room that seemed to be closing in on me. The air was thick, suffocating. The shadows pressed in tighter, as if the house itself were alive, suffocating me with its silence. And then I heard it again, the whisper, now a screech. You left me. The walls began to pulse like a heartbeat, and the air grew colder. The temperature dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath clouding in front of me. The floor beneath me seemed to ripple like water, and I had the sickening feeling that the house wasn't just decaying, it was changing, twisting, becoming something else entirely. I had to get out. I had to leave. I forced myself to move toward the door again, this time with a surge of panic that made my legs move faster. I reached the door, grasping the knob, but just before I could open it, I heard the whisper again. This time louder than ever, so loud it filled the entire room. "Where do you think you're going?" The door jerked open on its own. My mind raced with fear, but I didn't care anymore. I just wanted out. I bolted through the doorway, into the dark hallway, but something was wrong. The house was shifting, distorting. I couldn't remember which way was the front door. The hallway seemed longer, endless. I ran and ran, but the whispers followed, getting louder with every step. "You can't escape me," it taunted. "Not now. Not after everything you've done." And then I realized this wasn't just about me remembering. This wasn't just about the past. This was about punishment. I had woken something up, something that had been waiting for me all these years, something that had never let go. And now, it wanted me to pay the price for my forgotten promises. I don't know how much time passed after that, minutes, hours, maybe days. Everything blurred together. The house seemed to stretch out, becoming more and more twisted the longer I stayed inside. Every corner I turned led me deeper into the house, into some dark, impossible version of it. The walls seemed to breathe, the floor creaked underfoot like it was alive. I couldn't escape. No matter how fast I ran, the house kept changing, warping around me, trapping me in an endless loop. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, echoing in my mind like 1,000 voices screaming in unison. "You left me, you promised, you promised." I stopped trying to make sense of it all. There was no sense to be made. The house was no longer the home I remembered. It had become something else, something alive, something that could feel my fear and feed on it. And whatever it was angry. So angry. I stumbled into what used to be the kitchen. The same kitchen where my grandmother used to sit, humming while she cooked, the smell of fresh bread filling the air. Now it was nothing but rotting wood and mold. The smell of decay was overwhelming, like the house itself was dying. But something else lingered in the air, a presence, dark and suffocating. I turned toward the table in the center of the room. The chairs were overturned, the once warm atmosphere replaced by an icy chill. I felt a cold hand brush my neck, and I froze. The whisper came again, only this time it wasn't distant. It was right next to me, so close I could feel its breath. "You think I would forget?" the voice hissed. "You were mine, and you still are. You never let me go." I spun around, my heart racing, but there was nothing there. The kitchen was empty, except for the shadows that clung to the corners like they were watching, waiting. I couldn't stay in this house any longer. I couldn't stay in this place where the air was thick with memories I didn't want to face, where the past was clawing at me like a living nightmare. I needed to leave. I needed to escape. But every time I thought I was getting closer to the door, the house just seemed to pull me further in, deeper into its grasp. I had no choice but to face it. I walked through the halls, each step heavier than the last, as if the house was testing me. "Will you remember?" It seemed to ask. "Will you pay for abandoning me?" The lights flickered as I reached the old stairwell. I hesitated, knowing that the basement was down there, in the bowels of the house, where I had never ventured as a child. But the whispers, those damn whispers, told me to go. They urged me to go down, to confront what had been waiting all these years. With every step I took, I could feel the temperature drop. The darkness at the bottom of the stairs was so thick, it felt like I was walking into a void. I hesitated, but something inside me pushed me forward. Something told me that if I didn't confront it now, I never would. I reached the bottom of the stairs. The basement was just as I remembered it. Old boxes, forgotten furniture, and dust. But in the far corner, where the light barely reached, there was something new. A small, broken mirror, its surface cracked, lay on the floor. And standing in front of it was the figure, my imaginary friend, the entity that had haunted me since I arrived. But now it wasn't just a shadow. It had taken a form, a twisted version of the friend I once knew. Its eyes were hollow, dark voids, and its face was gaunt, stretched thin, like a mask of anguish. It turned toward me, and I could feel the weight of its gaze, like it was tearing through my soul. "You forgot, didn't you?" it whispered, its voice dripping with malice. "You left me here to rot while you moved on with your life. And now you're back. But it's too late. You can't undo what you've done." I wanted to scream, but my voice was lost. The air was thick with regret, with the weight of years of abandonment. I had ignored the warning signs. I had ignored my past, hoping it would stay buried. But it didn't stay buried. It had waited for me to return, and now it was demanding its payment. I realized then what I had to do. I had to confront the truth. I had to remember what I had promised. I had to face the entity that had never left me, the one I had abandoned without even realizing it. I knelt before the mirror, staring into the shattered reflection, and as I looked into the fractured glass, I saw my younger self standing beside the imaginary friend, laughing and playing. But something in that reflection shifted. My younger self wasn't smiling anymore. He was crying. We were both crying, and I knew this was the price I had to pay. Not just for forgetting, but for breaking the promise I'd made long ago. The house around me began to shake, and the walls seemed to close in. The air was suffocating. I could feel it. Whatever this thing was, it was about to take me. I had broken the bond, and now it was time to collect. And as the darkness enveloped me, I heard it one last time, the voice that had never left. You will never forget again. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was being crushed by an invisible weight, and my head was spinning. The darkness was all around me, pressing in from all sides. It was suffocating, as though the very air in this house had turned against me. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. My legs were like lead, my arms frozen at my sides. Every part of me screamed to run, to get away, but there was nowhere to go. The house had become a labyrinth, and I was trapped inside it, trapped with whatever it was that had been waiting for me. The mirror was still in front of me, its cracked surface reflecting a distorted version of the world around me. I could hear whispers again, more intense than before, more desperate. It wasn't just the voice of the entity anymore. It was a chorus of voices, rising in unison, a cacophony of anger and sorrow. You can't run, the entity hissed, its voice slithering into my ears. You can't escape your fate. You should have remembered. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but I couldn't. My mouth was dry, my throat tight. I was caught in the web of memories that I had tried so hard to forget. Every moment, every promise came rushing back to me. I had been so naive, thinking that time would erase the things I had buried deep inside. But I had been wrong. The figure moved closer, its shadow stretching across the room, swallowing up the light. I could feel its presence now, like a suffocating fog, pressing against me, filling me with dread. It was here, standing right before me, and it wasn't going to let me go until it had taken what it wanted. I finally found the strength to speak, my voice shaking, barely above a whisper. What do you want from me? The entity's hollow eyes bore into mine. It smiled, but it wasn't a smile of joy. It was a grin of contempt, of something ancient and unforgiving. I want what you owe me, it said. You took everything from me when you left. You were my companion, my only friend, and you abandoned me. You left me to rot in this house, to fade into nothingness. But I've waited for you to come back, so I could make you remember. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know. I didn't remember. I didn't know I promised anything. The figure's laugh was low and menacing. Of course you didn't. You erased it all, buried it so deep that even you couldn't find it. But I remember. I've always remembered. And now you will too. I felt something shift inside me. A burning sensation in my chest, like the memories were clawing their way to the surface, forcing their way out. I remembered now. All the games, all the laughter. The promises I'd made as a child. The thing I'd called a friend was never just a friend. It was something more, a presence that had latched onto me, a creature that had fed on my fear and loneliness. And I had forgotten it. I had forgotten it. The air around me grew colder, the shadows darker. I could hear the house groaning, as if it were alive, as if it were feeding on my terror. The figure reached out, its skeletal hand touching my face, and the world seemed to tilt. I could feel it in my very bones, the weight of years of neglect, the price of forgetting. You're mine now, it whispered, its voice seeping into my soul. You never left me. You just left yourself behind. But I found you again. The moment its fingers made contact with my skin, everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor of the basement. The air was thick, and the silence was deafening. The house felt still, too still. I sat up slowly, my head pounding, my body aching like I'd been in some sort of deep sleep. But when I looked around, I realized something was wrong. The basement was completely different. The walls were smooth, pristine, and there was no dust. No signs of decay. No sign that this place had been abandoned for years. It was as though time itself had been erased. I stood up, disoriented, and made my way to the stairs. My legs felt weak, but I managed to climb up, step by step, until I reached the main floor. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. I walked through the living room, the kitchen. Everything was exactly as it had been when I was a child. The furniture was polished, the pictures on the walls freshly hung. I walked to the front door, but when I tried to open it, I couldn't. It was locked from the outside. I felt my pulse quicken. Something wasn't right. Something had changed. And then in the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure, standing in the doorway to the living room. It was me, but it wasn't. The figure in the doorway was younger, smiling, happy. The same face, the same eyes. But there was something wrong about the smile. It wasn't my smile. "Come on in," it said, its voice too sweet, too inviting. "I've been waiting for you." And in that moment, I realized the truth. The price I had paid wasn't just for my past, it was for my future. I had become part of this place, part of the house, part of whatever it was that had haunted me. I couldn't escape anymore. I was home. The door wouldn't open. I yanked at the handle with all my strength, but it was as if the house had grown heavier, the walls pressing in, suffocating the air around me. My heart was hammering in my chest, and the reality of what was happening started to sink in. I wasn't just stuck in this house. I was trapped in time, locked in a moment where nothing ever changed, where the house was alive and its memories had become mine forever. The figure in the doorway, my younger self, smiled again, that same eerie grin that I now recognized as wrong. It wasn't just a reflection of my past, it was a twisted version of me, something that had been left behind and was now reaching out, trying to pull me into its world. Into this world. "You shouldn't have come back," it said, its voice sweet yet laced with something darker, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "But it's too late. You're here now. You've always been here." I took a step back, shaking my head, trying to make sense of it all, but it felt like I was drowning. The house was warping, the air thick with the scent of mildew and old wood, but also something worse, something rotten. And as I looked at the figure, the twisted version of myself, I realized that it wasn't just a memory. It was a part of me, something I had forgotten, but it had never forgotten me. I could feel its eyes on me, as if it were pulling something from my mind, something I didn't want to remember. "You were never supposed to leave," it whispered, its voice growing louder, more insistent. "You were mine. You belonged here. You still do." I couldn't breathe. The walls of the house seemed to pulse with each beat of my heart, each word the figure spoke. I knew what it wanted now. It wanted me to accept it, to accept my past, to accept the dark promise I had made as a child, the promise that I'd forgotten. And now it was collecting its due. It had been waiting, watching for this moment. "I don't belong here," I choked out, my throat tight with fear. "This isn't real. This isn't real." The figure stepped forward, its smile widening into something twisted, monstrous. "Oh, it's real. It's more real than you can imagine. This house is mine. And now you're part of it." I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. The house seemed to be closing in around me, the walls narrowing, the air thick with the stench of decay. I had to get out. I had to find a way to escape. I turned toward the hallway, but it felt like the house was shifting, moving with me, pushing me back. The more I tried to escape, the more the walls closed in, the more the house began to twist and distort, becoming something alien, something alive. The whispers started again, louder, angrier, filling my mind, pushing me to the edge of madness. "You can't leave. You'll never leave." I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, and I spun around, only to face the twisted figure once more. It had followed me, its face inches from mine now, its eyes cold and empty, hollow. "You left me," it snarled. "You broke our bond. And now, you're mine forever." I gasped, my breath coming in ragged bursts. My legs gave way beneath me, and I collapsed to the floor. The house around me seemed to groan, its floors creaking as though it were alive, aware of what was happening. The figure towered over me, its smile never fading. "You can't run," it repeated, the words sinking into my soul. "You can't escape me. This house, this place, it's you now. You are part of it." And in that moment, I understood the true horror of what had happened. I wasn't just trapped in the house. I was part of it. The house had been waiting for me to return, to come back and take my place, to fill the hole that had been left when I abandoned it all those years ago. The memories that had been buried were coming back, clearer than ever before. The promises I had made, the friend I had forgotten, the entity was right. I had broken the bond. I had left it to rot in this house, to fester in the dark corners of my mind, waiting for the moment it would collect. The walls began to close in even tighter, the ceiling lowering, the space around me growing smaller. I could feel it now, the weight of the house's anger, its hunger. It wasn't just angry at me for abandoning it, it was angry that I had forgotten. "Please," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Please, I didn't mean it. I didn't know." But the figure only laughed, a hollow, distorted sound that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. "You think it matters now?" it asked, its voice mocking. "It's too late for regrets. You've made your choice. And now you'll pay for it." The walls continued to close in, and I felt the darkness swallowing me whole. There was no escape, no way out. The house was alive, and I was part of it, forever. As the last sliver of light faded, I heard the voice one last time, quiet, soothing, and yet terrifying. "You'll never leave. You'll never forget." And then, everything went black. I woke up with a start, my body trembling as though I had just been pulled from some deep, suffocating abyss. My vision blurred, but the oppressive weight of the house was still there, pressing down on me, thick and suffocating. It was like I hadn't truly woken up at all, like I was still inside the nightmare. The air smelled of damp wood and decay, the silence heavy, broken only by the faint creaking of the old house around me. But this time, something was different. The walls didn't look like they were closing in. Instead, they were still, almost too still. There was no more oppressive whispering in my ears, no more mocking voice of the entity that had tormented me. Everything felt too quiet, too calm. I tried to sit up, but my body refused to cooperate. My legs were stiff, my chest tight, like I was anchored to the floor. The cold seeped into my bones, and I realized with growing horror that I couldn't move. I tried to scream, but the sound never came. My mouth opened, but no words, no sound left my throat. Then I saw it. In the corner of the room, that twisted figure was standing again, just like before. My younger self. Only it wasn't me, not anymore. It was different, twisted. Its smile was wider, its eyes darker, and there was a hunger to the way it moved, a predatory gleam in its gaze that sent ice through my veins. "You're not going anywhere," it whispered, its voice a low rasp, like a snake's hiss. It stepped closer, slowly, deliberately. "You never were." I wanted to fight back, to scream, but the words caught in my throat, and my body refused to listen. I couldn't even move my hands. It felt like my very soul was being locked inside, trapped in this place with the thing that had been waiting for me. It circled me, the shadows it cast stretching long and distorted on the floor. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the truth. I hadn't escaped. I hadn't gotten away at all. "You thought you could just leave," the figure mused, its voice dripping with contempt. "But you didn't leave, did you? You just ran. Ran from the truth. From me." I tried to look away, but it was like my eyes were drawn to it, compelled, like a magnet pulling me in. The memories came rushing back, too fast, too violent. The long nights as a child, sitting alone in this house, talking to my friend. The thing I had thought was just a figment of my imagination. I had left it. I had forgotten. But it had never forgotten me. And now it was too late. "You were always mine," it whispered. "And you'll always be mine." Suddenly, the floor beneath me gave way. I was falling, spinning, plunging into darkness, into the cold, damp air of the house that felt alive, that had consumed me. My body slammed against the floor with a sickening thud, but there was no pain. Only the cold, endless silence of being trapped. I pushed myself up, my hands trembling as I tried to stand, but the room, the house, nothing was real. The walls were closing in again, this time in slow motion, like a dream I couldn't wake up from. The air grew thick, suffocating, like I was drowning in it. But no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I screamed inside my head, I couldn't escape. "You're still here," the figure said, its voice cold and distant now, like it had always been. "This is your place now. You belong to me." I looked around, desperate, trying to find some way out, but there was nothing. No door, no window, just the suffocating darkness, pressing in from all sides. The house was a prison, and I was its prisoner. "Why?" I gasped, my voice barely a whisper. "Why can't I leave?" The figure laughed, the sound echoing off the walls. It wasn't the laugh of a child anymore. It was something older, something cruel. "Because you're part of me. You always were. And now you'll never leave. You'll never forget." I closed my eyes, tears burning my skin. but no matter what I did, I couldn't escape the truth. I had been foolish to think I could outrun my past. I had thought that time would erase the memories, that leaving would break the bond. But it hadn't. It never would. I opened my eyes again, but the figure was gone. The house, though, its presence, its weight, it was still here. Always here. And then I heard it. The whispers, soft and constant, growing louder, surrounding me, filling my ears. They weren't the voices of the house anymore, but my own voice. My own thoughts, echoing in the darkness. You can't escape. You can't leave. You belong to me now. I looked down at my hands, my palms open, trembling. In the reflection, I saw my face, twisted and distorted, just like the figure. A smile spread across my lips, and I realized, with a sinking horror, that it wasn't just the house that had claimed me. It was me. I don't know how much time has passed since I last wrote, but it doesn't matter anymore. The hours, the days, they blur together. It's all the same here. In this house, this prison. I thought I understood it before. I thought I knew what I was dealing with. But now I can feel the truth pulsing through my veins. It's not just a house. It's not just some dark memory trying to haunt me. The house is alive, and it has claimed me. I am a part of it now, and I cannot escape. Every time I try, every time I think I'm getting away, I end up right back here. The walls close in, the air gets heavy, and the house, it knows. It knows where I am. It knows my every move, my every thought. It's like the house has become an extension of me, feeding off my fear, my regret. I don't even know if I'm still myself anymore. The memories come in flashes, when I was a child, playing in the yard, laughing with my friend. But now I realize it wasn't just an imagination, was it? No, it was her, the entity, the thing I had forgotten, the thing I thought I could leave behind. But I never did. She never left. And now she's with me, every corner of this house, in every creak of the floorboards, in every shadow that flickers in the corner of my eye. She's always watching, always waiting, always reminding me of what I left behind. She never wanted me to leave. She wanted me to stay, to be hers. I thought that by coming back, I'd face the past, deal with it, and move on. But I was wrong. This house is no place for moving on. It's a place for binding, for trapping people in time, in their memories, and in their mistakes. And I made the mistake of thinking I could escape. It started small at first. A flicker in the corner of my eye. A strange noise in the middle of the night. I thought I was imagining it, but no, I wasn't. She was here, always here, watching, waiting, just like she always had been when I was a child. At first, I could hear her voice whispering to me, soothing and sweet. "Come back to me," she would say. "Come back and be mine." But now it's different. Now her whispers have become demands, threats. She wants me, not just as a memory, but as a part of her. She wants me to forget everything else, everyone else, and just stay with her forever. I can feel her presence, her cold fingers creeping along the edges of my mind, touching the deepest parts of me, the parts one tried to forget. And when I close my eyes, I see her, standing in the doorway, that twisted smile stretched across her face. The same face I used to know so well, the face I thought I'd outgrown. But it's still there, a part of me, and it's not going anywhere. Sometimes I think I can hear her laughing, just behind me. A low, guttural laugh that chills me to the bone. She's toying with me. She wants me to break, to lose myself completely. I can't tell where the house ends and I begin anymore. It's all one thing now, this place and me. When I walk through the hallways, I feel the walls pulse, as if they're breathing. I feel the floors beneath me shift, as if they're alive. And every door I open, every corner I turn, I end up in the same place. In that room, the room where it all began. The walls are covered in old, peeling wallpaper, the same faded floral pattern from my childhood. The same room where I used to play with her. But now it's dark, cold, and the smell of decay hangs in the air, thick and suffocating. I can't escape it. I can't escape her. And then, when I think I can't take it anymore, I see her again, standing in the center of the room, waiting for me. Her eyes gleam in the darkness, and I feel a chill crawl up my spine. Her smile widens, twisted, hungry. "You'll never leave," she whispers, her voice 1,000 times colder than before. "You belong to me now. Forever." I want to scream. I want to fight. But I can't. It's like I've become part of the house, part of her. And I know deep down there's no way out. There's no escaping the bond we share. She's taken me body and soul. I've become what I feared most, a prisoner in my own memories, in my own past. And no matter how hard I try, no matter how much I scream for help, no one will come. There's no one left to save me. I am alone, with her, forever. And the worst part is, I know now that I always was.